The best player on the state's top-ranked girls' basketball team hadn't touched the court in 3 months, not in practice, not for a single second of game time. Coach Evans kept her anchored to the bench game after game, while less talented players got every minute. But on the night of the championship, with Olympic development scouts in the stands, they only asked about one person, the girl he refused to play. Her name is Maya Johnson, a 16-year-old point guard with a vertical leap that defied physics and a shooting percentage that led the conference. For 3 seasons, she was the engine of the Ravens. But this year, something changed. The coach who once praised her now treats her like a ghost. This is the story of a talent buried, and the single night when the whole world was forced to see what he refused to. To understand how a player like Maya vanishes from her own team, you have to understand the system built to make her disappear. It started not with a bang, but with a series of small, calculated moves. Maya's basketball life began at the community center on 8th Street. Her mother, Lena, worked 2 jobs, a daytime paralegal and nighttime security, but never missed a game. Basketball wasn't just a sport, it was their shared language, a ladder they believed could lift them. By freshman year, Maya was a local legend. She led the Ravens to their first regional title in a decade, dropping 32 points in the final. Scouts from mid-major colleges began sending letters. Coach Evans called her the future of the program. But the future has a way of changing when people in power decide it should. Coach David Evans arrived at Lincoln High 5 years ago with a polished resume and a philosophy he called the system. He preached discipline, structure, and what he termed program players. In his office, he kept a framed photo of his own college team, all white from a different era. He was a legacy builder, he'd tell the Booster Club. He wanted players who bought in completely. The shift was subtle at first. Sophomore year, Maya's playing time began to dip in the second half of blowout games. Managing minutes, Evans called it. Then came the new drills, complex set plays that emphasized passing over individual creativity. Maya, a natural playmaker who read the game 2 steps ahead, was told to stop over-dribbling and stick to the script. Her teammate, Sarah Jenkins, the coach's niece, saw her role expand. Sarah was a solid shooter but slower on defense. Yet in practices, Evans would stop play to highlight Sarah's correct positioning, while Maya's steals and assists were met with a silent nod. The message was being received, not just by Maya but by the entire team. Hierarchy was being rewritten. Then came the preseason meeting. Lena Johnson sat in a plastic chair in Evans's office, listening as he laid out his vision for the year. Maya, he said, had tremendous physical gifts, but needed to work on her intangibles, her coachability. He wanted her to be more of a team-first communicator. Lena left confused. Her daughter was the first to help teammates up, the last to leave the gym. What intangibles were missing? But she trusted the process. They always trusted the process. The season opener was a wake-up call. Maya started but played only 12 minutes. Every time she drove to the basket, Evans yanked her for a defensive mismatch. Sarah played 28 minutes, took twice as many shots, and made only a third of them. They lost by 8. In the locker room, Evans didn't mention playing time. He talked about effort, about heart. By the 5th game, Maya was coming off the bench. The official reason was a minor practice infraction. She'd been 30 seconds late from study hall. The demotion was permanent. From the bench, she watched games unfold like a masterclass in what not to do. She saw defensive rotations break down, offensive sets crumble. Her hands itched. Her jaw ached from clenching it. Her mother started making calls, polite then persistent. Evans was always courteous, always vague. "We're developing the whole roster, Lena. It's a long season." Maya's attitude in practice needs to align with our culture. Here's the thing about culture as a weapon: it's impossible to disprove. You can show stats, you can show game film, but you can't quantify a feeling a coach claims is missing. It's the perfect, unfalsifiable critique. Maya's stats from the bench were a ghost story. 0 points, 0 minutes. Yet in practice, she dominated. During scrimmages, she'd run circles around the starters. Teammates would glance at the coaches, wondering when the obvious would become policy. It never did. Assistant Coach Miller, a former college player himself, saw it all. He'd pull Maya aside, work on her jumper, tell her to keep her head up. But when Lena cornered him after a game, his eyes dropped. "My hands are tied," he murmured. "It's not about basketball anymore." The rumor, whispered in the bleachers and texted between parents, was that Evans was grooming Sarah for a scholarship at his alma mater, a small Division II school where he still had pull. Sarah's father, a prominent local dentist and booster club treasurer, had become Evans's closest ally. The pieces were aligning into a brutal, familiar logic, access and influence trading for opportunity. Maya's world shrank to the wooden bench and the sound of the buzzer. She stopped bringing her phone to school to avoid the social media posts, game highlights she wasn't in. The college letters slowed, then stopped. The ladder was being kicked away. Then, in late February, with playoffs on the horizon, the unexpected happened. A letter arrived, not for the athletic department, but addressed directly to Maya Johnson. It was on thick, official stationery. The United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the women's national team youth development camp, was inviting 50 of the nation's top high school players to a summer evaluation. Maya was one of them. For a week, hope flickered. This was validation from the highest possible source. Surely this would change things. Lena brought the letter to Coach Evans. He read it in his office, his face unreadable. He placed it carefully on his desk. "This is a great honor, Lena, for Maya, for our program." He paused. "But my focus is on the team in front of me, on the state championship. We can't have distractions. We need players fully invested in our system right now." The invitation wasn't framed as an opportunity. It was framed as a threat. The Ravens kept winning, but in ugly, grinding fashion. They had talent, but no true point guard to orchestrate it. The playoffs arrived. First round, second round, quarterfinals. Maya sat, her warm-up jacket zipped to her chin, a statue of wasted potential. The local paper ran a small story. Star guards benching remains Lincoln's biggest mystery. The mystery was about to collide with a very public truth. Because the Olympic Committee didn't just send letters. Their scouts traveled, and two of them, tracking another prospect, decided to stop in and watch the state semifinal. They saw a slow, plodding game. They saw a team struggling to score. And they saw a player with USA Basketball branded on her warm-up pants, sitting completely still at the end of the bench, her eyes tracking the game with an intensity that screamed she knew every play before it happened. One scout leaned to the other, pointing not at the court but at the sidelines. Their notepads remained closed. They had only one question for the athletic director after the game. That question would detonate the season, expose the lie, and set in motion a confrontation no one saw coming. The question hung in the athletic director's office like a struck chord. Who is number 24 and why isn't she playing? For the scouts, it was simple curiosity. For everyone else in the room, it was a detonation. Athletic Director Collins, a former coach himself, felt the floor tilt. He'd seen the scouts pointing. He knew exactly who they meant. Maya Johnson, the girl who hadn't played a meaningful minute all season. He stammered out an answer about coach's decisions and team strategy, but the scouts weren't looking for an explanation. They were looking for film, for stats, for anything on the player with the Olympic camp invite who was, inexplicably, a permanent fixture on the bench. Coach Evans was summoned to the office minutes later. His face, usually a mask of calm control, was pale. The scouts had left, but their question remained echoing. Evans launched into his prepared defense. Maya was a practice player. She lacked the mental toughness for big games. She didn't fit the system. Collins listened, but for the first time he heard the hollow spaces in the argument. He'd seen the practice tapes. He'd seen the stats from the year before. A cold knot of understanding formed in his gut. He gave Evans a direct order. She plays in the championship, 10 minutes minimum, This isn't a discussion. It was about optics now. The scouts would be back for the final. The whole state would be watching. News travels through a high school faster than any virus. By seventh period the next day, everyone knew. The Olympic scouts had asked about Maya. The rumor mutated with each retelling. They were offering a spot on the junior national team. They were going to get Evans fired. The atmosphere in the girls' locker room before practice was electric with a strange, tense energy. Sarah Jenkins avoided eye contact with everyone. Maya sat at her locker, lacing her shoes with deliberate slowness, trying to steady the earthquake in her chest. Hope, after months of being systematically starved, is a dangerous thing. It hurts to feel it again. Coach Evans called practice to order. His voice was tighter than usual. He ran them through drills with a brutal, silent intensity. Then, with 20 minutes left, he blew his whistle. Johnson with the first team. The gym went quiet. Maya stepped onto the court with the starters. For the next 15 minutes, she reminded everyone what they'd been missing. She threaded no-look passes through traffic. She locked down Sarah on defense, stealing the ball twice. She hit 3 consecutive shots from beyond the arc. The evidence was undeniable, playing out in real time under the fluorescent lights. Evans watched, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When he blew the final whistle, he didn't praise her. He didn't criticize her. He simply said, "Showers." The message was clear. Nothing had changed. But everything had. That evening, Lena Johnson's phone rang. It was a reporter from the state sports website. He'd heard rumblings about a top prospect being benched and Olympic interest. He wanted a comment. Lena, cautious but furious, confirmed the basic facts. Her daughter had an Olympic camp invite. She had been benched the entire season. Yes, the scouts had been at the game. She gave no opinion. She just stated the reality. The article went live at 9 p.m. It was titled "The Mystery of the Benched Olympian." It didn't accuse. It juxtaposed. It listed Maya's freshman and sophomore stats. It mentioned the Olympic invitation. It quoted the anonymous team source who said Coach Evans' system didn't value her style of play. And it ended with the confirmed detail that USA basketball scouts had inquired about her. By 10 p.m., the article was shared across every local sports forum. By midnight, it had reached national basketball circles. The narrative was perfect, and it broke in the exact way the school feared, not as a local grievance, but as a national sports mystery. In his suburban home, Coach Evans spent the night refreshing the comment sections. They were a torrent. "Fire this clown of a coach. This is racism, plain and simple. How do you bench a kid with that invite?" His carefully constructed reality, the one where he was the disciplined architect of a winning program, was being dismantled in public piece by piece. But here, where the story pivots, this wasn't just about one coach's bias. It was about an ecosystem that enabled it. The next morning, the school principal, Dr. Helen Reed, found Evans and Collins in her office. Her priority was containment. The championship was in 48 hours. The school's reputation, booster donations, collegiate partnerships, all of it was suddenly tied to this exploding story. She proposed a solution. Maya would start the championship game. They would present a unified front. A player overcoming adversity, they'd call it. The benching would be framed as a long-term development plan that had now paid off. It was a classic administrative maneuver. Absorb the scandal, repackage it as a triumph, and move on. They assumed Maya and her mother would play along. They assumed the win would erase the questions. They assumed wrong. Lena Johnson was done assuming. When Principal Reed presented the plan, Lena listened calmly. Then she asked one question. "Will Coach Evans be on the sideline for this game?" The principal blinked. "Of course, he's our head coach." "Then my daughter isn't playing," Lena said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "You don't get to use her as a prop to clean up his mess. Either he's removed or we walk, and I hold a press conference on the steps of this school explaining why." It was a nuclear option, and it changed the game completely. This was no longer about playing time. This was about power, accountability, and who got to write the ending. Panic set in. The boosters, led by Sarah Jenkins's father, rallied behind Evans. They threatened to pull funding for the new gymnasium annex. They spoke of loyalty and not bowing to media pressure. The school board was called for an emergency session. Lines were drawn, not along right and wrong, but along influence and allegiance. Amidst this chaos, a second, quieter revelation was unfolding. Assistant coach Miller had been doing some digging of his own. Haunted by his own silence, he went back through years of game film and roster sheets. He wasn't just looking at Maya. He was looking for a pattern. What he found was subtle, but it was there. Over Evans's 5-year tenure, 7 players had transferred out of the program. All 7 were students of color. All 7 had cited playing time issues or philosophical differences. Their replacements were consistently less statistically accomplished. None had gone on to play college ball. The pipeline for black and brown athletes at Lincoln High under this system had a leak, a deliberate one. Miller compiled the data, names, dates, before and after stats. He didn't know what to do with it. He was a part-time coach with a mortgage. Speaking up meant ending his career. But the weight of the evidence and the sight of Maya on that bench became too much. He requested a private meeting with athletic director Collins. He brought the folder. He laid it out not as an accusation, but as a series of questions the data demanded. Collins flipped through the pages, his face growing graver with each one. The case against Evans was no longer about a single bad decision. It was about a sustained, discriminatory pattern. A system, as Maya's mother had called it, built to make certain players disappear. Collins was now trapped between the booster club's money and the federal law on his desk. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act isn't a suggestion, it's a requirement. A pattern of discrimination based on race in a publicly funded program is a lawsuit waiting to happen, a district-ending lawsuit. He made his choice. He went to the school board with Miller's folder. The emergency session turned from a debate about a coaching decision into a crisis management meeting about institutional liability. While the adults argued in closed rooms, Maya was in her backyard, shooting at a rusted hoop nailed to the garage. The ball thumped against the backboard in a steady, angry rhythm. Her phone buzzed constantly, friends, reporters, even players from other schools offering support. She ignored it all. The championship was tomorrow. She was supposedly starting. Her whole world had been upended, and yet the court was the only place where anything still made sense. Her mother came outside, the setting sun casting long shadows. She told Maya about the meeting, about the ultimatum, about the folder Coach Miller had compiled. For the first time, Maya understood this wasn't about her missing a shot or being late to study hall. This was about something so much bigger than her, and yet she was standing at the very center of it. "What do you want to do?" Lena asked her. Maya caught the ball and held it. She looked at the hoop, then at her hands. "I want to play," she said, "but I don't want to play for him. I don't want to save him." That night, the school board reached a messy, temporary compromise. Coach Evans would remain the head coach for the championship game, but assistant coach Miller would handle all substitutions and playing time decisions. It was an absurd, unworkable solution, a divided command on the biggest night of the year. But it was the only way to get both Maya on the court and the boosters off their backs. The stage was set for a farce. A state championship game where the head coach had been stripped of his core authority, where the star player had been publicly humiliated and then reinstated, where 2 scouts from the most prestigious program in the world would be watching, not the game, but the drama unfolding on the sideline. As the team boarded the bus to the state arena, the silence was absolute. No music, no chatter, just the rumble of the engine and the weight of what was to come. Maya took a window seat, looking out at the passing streetlights. Coach Evans sat up front, staring straight ahead, a general whose army no longer trusted his orders. They were heading toward the brightest lights in high school sports, but the real battle wouldn't be on the court. It would be in the aftermath, in the truths that this pressure cooker environment was about to force into the open. And the first crack in the facade appeared before they even arrived, with a text message that would change everything. The text message was from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of an email chain between the Booster Club president and Coach Evans, dated from the previous summer. The subject line, "Roster Management for Long-Term Program Health." Maya stared at the glowing screen in the dark bus. The first email was from Sarah Jenkins's father. "Dave, we need to ensure Sarah gets the exposure for the D2 scholarship. The AAU circuit didn't go as planned. She needs to be the focal point this season." Evans's reply was 2 words: "Understood, handled." The second message in the chain, sent a week later, was from Evans. "Met with the Johnson girl today. Laid the groundwork for a development year. She's talented but raw. Will manage minutes to prioritize team chemistry and system buy-in." The Boosters' response: "Perfect. Keep the pipeline clear." Maya's breath caught. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a blueprint. She showed her mother. Lena's face hardened in the dim light. She forwarded the screenshot to Athletic Director Collins and Principal Reed with a 1-line message: "Explain this." Chaos erupted in real time. Collins's phone buzzed as the bus pulled into the arena service entrance. He read the email, his blood running cold. This wasn't just bias. This was a conspiracy. A quid pro quo using a public school team as a private placement service. He immediately called the Booster president, who sputtered, denied, then threatened legal action for hacking. The fragile compromise from the school board shattered before the team even stepped off the bus. The arena was a cathedral of noise and light. 10,000 fans, a statewide television broadcast, and the 2 Olympic scouts sitting courtside. The Lincoln Ravens entered not as contenders, but as a scandal on legs. Cameras followed Maya's every move during warm-ups. The commentators, now fully briefed on the drama, talked in hushed, serious tones about off-court distractions. In the locker room, the divided command structure collapsed immediately. Coach Evans tried to give a pre-game speech about blocking out the noise. Assistant Coach Miller stood awkwardly in the corner. Half the team stared at the floor. The other half stole glances at Maya, who sat silently, stretching, her expression unreadable. The trust necessary for a team to function had been vaporized. Then 2 minutes before tip-off, Principal Reed entered the locker room. She pulled Evans and Collins into the equipment closet. Her voice was a strained whisper. "The State Athletic Association just called. They've opened an emergency inquiry based on the emails. If you coach tonight, Evans, the team could be forced to forfeit retroactively. You need to step aside. Now." Evans's face crumpled. His career, his reputation was dissolving in front of him. He had no choice. He walked back into the locker room, gathered the team, and in a hollow voice said, "Coach Miller will be acting head coach tonight. I'll be in the stands." He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he left. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment there was only the distant roar of the crowd. Then Coach Miller clapped his hands. "All right, new plan. Johnson, you're starting at point. We're running the offense through you. Everything we did in practice this week is out the window. We play fast. We play through our best player. Any questions?" There were none. But here, where the story gets even bigger, the game itself was almost an afterthought. Maya was brilliant. She scored 12 points in the first quarter, dished out 5 assists, and played defense that made the opposing point guard look like she was moving in slow motion. The Ravens led by 11. The scouts were on their feet taking notes. The narrative was writing itself, the vindicated star shining on the biggest stage. But in the stands, a second, more dangerous story was breaking. A local investigative reporter, tipped off about the email scandal, had just published a deeper dive. And she'd found the pattern Coach Miller had uncovered, plus more. She tracked down 3 of the 7 players who had transferred out. Their stories were identical. Promises of playing time that never materialized, vague critiques about fit, and pressure to leave the program to make room. 2 of them were now playing at junior colleges. One had quit basketball altogether. The article didn't just name Evans. It named the Booster Club president. It named the principal for her years of inaction. It quoted Title VI legal experts about systemic discrimination. It framed the entire Lincoln High girls basketball program not as a sports story, but as a civil rights violation. Fans in the arena, following the game on their phones, began to murmur. The buzz wasn't about the score. It was about the article spreading through the bleachers like wildfire. The championship game was being played under a darkening cloud of institutional failure. At halftime, with the Ravens up by 15, the team returned to a locker room that felt more like a bunker. Coach Miller focused on X's and O's, but the players were checking their phones. They saw the headlines. They saw the comments calling their program racist. They saw their own names mentioned in a national scandal. The pressure was no longer about winning a game. It was about surviving the aftermath. Then the pivotal moment. Early in the third quarter, Maya drove the lane, drew a foul, and landed hard on her tailbone. She got up slowly, wincing. The trainer ran out. On the sideline, Coach Miller had a decision: pull his star, who was clearly in pain, or leave her in to secure the championship. He looked at Maya. She nodded. "I'm fine." But she was. Her movement was hampered. Her shot was off. The opposing team sensed blood and went on a run, cutting the lead to 4 points. The arena, once buzzing with scandal, now roared with the pure tension of competition. The game was slipping away. With 3 minutes left, Maya missed a free throw. The lead was down to 2. Coach Miller called a timeout. In the huddle, Maya was breathing hard, her face tight with pain. Sarah Jenkins, who had been largely ineffective all game, spoke up. "Put me in. I can hit the outside shot." The team went silent. The irony was crushing. The player who had benefited from the conspiracy was now asking for the chance to be the hero. Miller looked at Maya. He saw the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of the entire season on her shoulders. He made the call. "Johnson, take a breather. Jenkins, in." Maya sat on the bench, a towel over her head. The cameras zoomed in on her face, searching for anger, for tears. They found only a profound, weary stillness. She had done everything she could. The rest was out of her hands. And then something unexpected happened. On the court, Sarah Jenkins caught a pass in the corner. She was wide open. She had the shot she'd been promised all season. She looked at the rim. Then, in a split-second decision, she passed the ball to a cutting teammate under the basket for an easy layup. The lead stretched to 4. On the next defensive possession, Sarah took a charge, absorbing a hard foul to stop a fast break. She got up, fist clenched, not in celebration, but in a kind of furious atonement. The game ended with the Ravens winning by 5. They were state champions. But as the confetti fell and the team gathered at center court, the celebration was muted, fractured. The players hugged, but their eyes were distant. They had won the game, but the victory felt hollow, poisoned by the truth of how they'd gotten there. The Olympic scouts left without speaking to anyone, their report presumably already written. In the post-game press conference, the questions weren't about basketball. They were about the emails, the transfers, the investigation. Coach Miller, exhausted, deferred to the administration. Principal Reed gave a canned statement about taking the allegations seriously and a full, independent review. It wasn't enough. That night on social media, a new hashtag began to trend, Justice for the 7. It was started by the former players who had transferred out. They shared their stories in videos and long threads. The case against Lincoln High was no longer about one player or one season. It was about 5 years of a broken system. The State Athletic Association announced the next morning that Lincoln High's championship title was under review, pending the outcome of their investigation. The trophy was, in effect, frozen. Maya Johnson woke up a state champion, but also the central figure in a firestorm that had engulfed her school, her town, and the entire state's athletic governance. She had her validation, but it tasted like ash. The fight for playing time was over. A much bigger fight for accountability, for the dismantling of an entire structure of privilege and exclusion, had just begun. And the first move would come from an unexpected place. The very booster club that had started it all, now scrambling to save themselves by turning on the man they had empowered. In the cold light of a Monday morning, the machinery of accountability finally began to turn. The state association's investigation was swift and thorough. Their findings, contained in a 50-page report, would dismantle the world Coach Evans had built, piece by piece. The emails were authentic. The pattern of preferential treatment for players connected to the booster club was systemic and deliberate. The treatment of Maya Johnson was deemed a retaliatory benching for the perceived threat of her Olympic invite drawing attention away from other players. The 7 transfers were recognized as a discriminatory pattern that created a hostile environment for athletes of color. The report's language was dry, legal, and utterly damning. The consequences were immediate and severe. Coach David Evans was formally terminated and his teaching license suspended pending a separate ethics review. He would never coach in the state again. The booster club president resigned from his position and from the school board. The entire booster organization was dissolved and reconstituted under strict new oversight rules. Principal Reed announced her early retirement at the end of the school year. The State Athletic Association stripped Lincoln High of its championship title. The trophy was vacated. There would be no banner hung in the gym. For the players, this was the hardest pill to swallow. They had won on the scoreboard, but the victory was forever tainted by the corruption that preceded it. The team voted unanimously to return their championship rings. It was a painful, symbolic act of cleansing. But the real change was structural. The district mandated implicit bias training for all coaches and athletic directors. A new, transparent playing time policy was instituted, requiring documented performance metrics to justify significant minutes disparities. A confidential reporting system for discrimination was created, bypassing the chain of command entirely. The reforms were copied by school districts across the state, turning Lincoln's scandal into a catalyst for change. For Maya Johnson, the personal reckoning was more complex. The Olympic Development Camp invitation stood. That summer, she traveled to Colorado Springs and trained alongside the best players in the country. She wasn't just good enough, she was one of the standouts. The scouts who had asked the fateful question became her mentors. She accepted a full scholarship to a prestigious Pac-12 university, a dream that had felt dead just months before. Yet the experience left scars. The joy of the game had been poisoned. She struggled with trust, with the feeling that any system could turn against her. It took a long season of therapy and patient coaching at the collegiate level to rediscover her pure love for basketball. She found it again, but it was a different love, harder, more aware, and fiercely protective of itself. Sarah Jenkins's story took an unexpected turn. The scholarship to her father's alma mater evaporated with the scandal. Instead, she enrolled at a community college and walked onto the basketball team. In a quiet interview with the same reporter who broke the story, she apologized to Maya, not for taking the minutes, but for her silence. "I knew it was wrong," she said, "but I wanted to believe I deserved it. That was my failure." She became an advocate for fair play in youth sports, a testament to the possibility of personal redemption. Assistant coach Miller was appointed the permanent head coach of the Lincoln Ravens. His first act was to reach out to every player who had transferred out, offering an apology and an open door. 2 of them returned to help coach summer camps. He built a program truly based on merit, which, within 2 years, made it back to the state finals, and won cleanly. The final surprising detail emerged from the wreckage. The anonymous source who had sent the damning email screenshot to Maya on the bus was never officially identified. But years later, at a charity game, a former team manager approached Maya. She'd been the one. She'd overheard Evans and the booster talking, had secretly accessed the email account, and had waited for the right moment to expose the truth. She was studying law now, she told Maya, specializing in sports equity. "You stood up," Maya said to her, "but you gave me the proof to stand on. Sometimes justice needs not just a face, but a silent partner with a phone." The legacy of that bench season echoes far beyond a gymnasium. It's cited in legal workshops on Title VI compliance. It's a case study in sports psychology courses on bias. For every young athlete who feels invisible on the bench, Maya Johnson's story is a reminder that talent can be buried, but truth has a way of rising to the surface, especially when someone is brave enough to point at the empty court and ask, why? Maya's journey from the end of the bench to the national stage is complete. The coach who tried to erase her is gone. The system that enabled him is reformed. The player he thought wasn't good enough proved she was the best of them all. This is where the documentary ends, not with a trophy, but with a principle restored. That the court, like justice, must be blind to everything but the game being played upon it. So what happens to all the other Mayas? The players whose talent is buried not by a lack of skill, but by a system that decides who deserves to be seen. This story was never just about one game, or one championship, or even one coach. It was about the quiet, everyday bias that shapes who gets an opportunity and who gets overlooked. That bias lives in the assumptions we make about coachability versus athleticism. It lives in the unspoken networks where access is traded for influence. It lives in our reluctance to question authority when something clearly isn't right. For every athlete who makes it to the Olympic development camp, how many never get the chance to step on the court in the first place? The reforms at Lincoln High are a blueprint, but they are just a start. Real change requires vigilance. It requires parents who ask uncomfortable questions. It requires assistants like Miller who choose evidence over silence. It requires players like Sarah Jenkins who, in the end, chose the right pass over the easy shot. Maya Johnson's name is now on a university roster. Her story is taught in ethics classes. The scouts who asked the question that started it all still use her film when training new evaluators on what to look for and what blind spots to avoid. The greatest validation wasn't the scholarship or the camp invite. It was the dismantling of the lie that she was ever the problem. The court is a microcosm of the world. The rules are supposed to be clear. The best players play. But as we've seen, those rules are only as fair as the people entrusted to enforce them. This story is a reminder to look to the end of the bench. The next transcendent talent might be sitting there, waiting for someone with the courage to point and ask, why? If you found this journey from injustice to accountability compelling, leave a like to support this channel. And subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories hidden in plain sight. The next one might change how you see the world. Thank you for watching.